Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us here today. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from in the world. We are so happy you are here with us today for our Let's Learn.net Blazor Hybrid event. I'm very excited about this. I have some great experts on, and we're going to walk through a brand new Learn module that we created just for this event. And so without further ado, let me bring on my first speaker.
Hey, Jamie, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Mutz?
I am doing great. Yes, nickname Mats. Yes,
Nickname Mutz.
yes. No, doing super good. Super excited to be here to not only talk about what Blazor Hybrid is, but how it works with .NET MAUI and even what .NET MAUI is. I'm not going to be the only person, Jamie. Right? We have another amazing guest host that's dropping off his kids currently.
Correct. Yes, we will be joined by Elon Lipton, who works directly on the Blazor Hybrid product with all of the team, and will be joining us shortly. But yes, had a few children that needed to be dropped off at school, so they'll be joining us shortly. Love seeing all of these people joining in from all over the world. Hello, hello, hello. I'm actually calling in from Italy myself. James is calling in from Oregon.
Yep.
Great. So excited to get started. James, I think you have some slide decks for us, correct?
Yeah, totally. So what we want to do today in the Let's Learn.net series is that I got multiple monitors and laptops here to monitor questions as they're coming in live. What we're going to do is two things today. We're going to first start with a kind of short presentation that I have that's going to sort of walk through, like, what is this thing? Why would I use it? Like, what are the basic building blocks of what Blazor Hybrid is and what .NET MAUI is? And then, like Jamie said, we're going to walk together through our very first Learn module. Now, that being said, I will say that if you want to get started today and you want to build your first Blazor Hybrid application, you probably need to install Visual Studio. And specifically, you'll need to install Visual Studio 2022, the 17.3 preview. And John, who's our MC behind the scenes, will drop a link into the chat for both Visual Studio for Mac and Visual Studio on Windows. And I'm going to be using that today. So all you need to do is check the .NET MAUI workload, and that'll give you everything that you need. But let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to first make sure here.
While James gets that set up, just for a quick agenda for those folks who have not joined this event before, it's a really fun event. We walk through a Learn module together. First, we'll start off with some slides to give you kind of a rundown and an overview of what Blazor Hybrid means and what it really is and how it's useful. Then we'll dive right into the workshop. Don't worry, we'll pause for questions, so feel free to load in that chat all the questions that you have. We'll get to as many as possible, but we also have experts in the chat who can answer those for you as well. Then once we get through a bunch of questions, we'll actually continue on with the workshop and hopefully complete the whole workshop in this event, so you will have completed your Learn module. Again, we'll save some time for questions. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want, and we'll get to as many as we can.
Awesome. Cool. I am ready over here if you want to bring up my screen.
Yeah, let's add that.
Cool. Yes. John, great question. John's asked me in a private chat. visualstudio.microsoft.com/preview. That's how you get it. Always. Awesome. Good question.
We'll throw that up and I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Perfect. So yeah, we're here to learn about Blazor Hybrid and what Blazor Hybrid is, and specifically how it works with other .NET frameworks such as .NET MAUI, but also with WPF and WinForms as well. So the first thing I do want to talk about actually is that there is an entire .NET Conf focus on .NET MAUI coming up on August 9th. You can go to focus.netconf.net. That specifically will have the full agenda, speakers, and all sorts of fun swag. There's going to be events happening around the globe all the time with .NET MAUI and for Blazor Hybrid. So definitely check that out. There's going to be not only a lot of .NET MAUI content there, but also some Blazor Hybrid stuff as well. So definitely want to check that out. It's in 12 days and probably at this point, 0 hours and 0 minutes. So I think it starts right around 8 or 8:30 in the morning Pacific. So definitely head over there for a .NET Conf focus on .NET MAUI. So let's talk about .NET. Now, this event has always been set up for anyone that's maybe new to .NET, new to the topic that we're covering. And I always like to talk about specifically what .NET is. And I sort of have this slide. You've probably seen it a million times if you've watched .NET stuff, but if you haven't, then this is going to be new to you. And you can think of .NET as the underlying system that helps you build applications for any different operating system or device that you want. Whether you want to build web apps, desktop apps, mobile apps, games, IoT, AI, do machine learning, deploy to the cloud, .NET's going to run everywhere. And .NET 6 is the latest release that is a unified platform across these different operating systems with UI frameworks on top of it. So there's common infrastructure, common compilers, common languages like C#, F#, and VB. And of course, there's an amazing ecosystem on GitHub and NuGet, which is our package management system, and great tools with Visual Studio, Visual Studio for Mac, Visual Studio Code, and of course, always the command line interface too. Now, we're going to be focusing in on this area here, which is web, desktop, and mobile, because with Blazor Hybrid, which Blazor itself traditionally being a web framework, Blazor Hybrid lets you go to more operating systems with the frameworks listed here for desktop and mobile. So like I said, Blazor itself is what I'll focus on first. And Blazor is our component-based UI framework to build web apps in C#, which enables you to not only build great web apps, progressive web apps for any browser, any server, anywhere you want to deploy. It runs in multiple modes that I'll talk about. But it's going to enable you to use C# in a component-based modern framework. And one of the big benefits of Blazor is that you're able to write all of your logic and all of your interactions with your components in C#. So what's nice is that you don't have to necessarily write JavaScript whenever a button is clicked and you want to increment a counter. You can just write that logic in C# and Blazor will handle all of it for you. And Blazor is built on top of ASP.NET Core. So, that has been around for a long time and has powers, hundreds of thousands of millions of websites on the internet. And Blazor sits on top of it. So it uses the same Razor component model to do that, which is really nice. On the other side, we have .NET MAUI. And .NET MAUI is our native UI framework that enables developers to build cross-platform apps for iOS, Android, macOS, and Windows. And we did get some questions in the chat about what .NET MAUI is. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you have been in the .NET ecosystem for a while, you may have known about Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. And .NET MAUI is the evolution of Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. iOS, Android, and Mac are the base underlying systems there that work on .NET, and it's been integrated into .NET 6 with common tooling and common infrastructure. And .NET MAUI is the UI framework and tooling and other things on top of it, helping you to build and deploy to those different frameworks as well. And if you were building in Xamarin Forms, you can easily upgrade. The cool part here is that you, maybe as a web developer, as a Blazor developer, may not know anything about .NET MAUI, and that's totally cool. Because with some of the stuff I'll talk about today, we'll talk about merging those two pieces of things together. Now, you might be saying, well, James, I'm brand new to Blazor, so let me just knock this out of the park first of what exactly Blazor is. Like I said, it's a full stack for building web apps with .NET, and it's built on top of ASP.NET Core. Now, traditionally, though, with ASP.NET Core and building web apps with MVC or with Razor pages, you're normally running the ASP.NET Core components on the server, and on the front end, you're using either JavaScript or other web frameworks like Angular, React, or Vue to build out your components. So obviously the thing here is that while you can leverage and use C# and .NET on the back end, your front end here is still primarily in those web technologies. Blazor looks to sort of change how you build your front ends with .NET, and it enables you to run .NET directly in the browser or via on the server and handle everything as a developer in C# with .NET, which is great. So you don't have to, use other web technologies that are out there to build your front end. You can use .NET everywhere, which is the dream. There are two models to Blazor. There's a server model and a WebAssembly model. And actually, there's a third one, which is called Blazor Hybrid. So there's a third model, but Blazor itself works in the fashion that Blazor server runs everything on the server. So your Blazor, your Razor components, your .NET logic, everything is over on the server running. So you get full power, full speed, full execution. And what Blazor server does is it handles everything via a SignalR real-time connection to handle DOM manipulation. So that means when a user clicks a button, that basically notifies Blazor to run logic and then updates the DOM that is displayed to the users. On the right-hand side is something called Blazor WebAssembly, or you might hear it called WASM. WebAssembly is an industry standard that is supported by every browser technology, mobile and desktop. And what's great about that is it enables other languages and runtimes to run directly in the browser. So here, for example, Blazor, .NET, and your Razor components and the .NET WebAssembly runtime, which is very, very small, runs directly into the browser itself. So you're running that logic locally, which is very cool. So what that means is that you can have a fully disconnected application that runs there. Now, .NET MAUI, on the other hand, like I said, is our open source platform for building modern and performant multi-platform apps for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows from C# and .NET from a single shared code base. So what's great about that is that if you want to build for these native platforms, iPads and iPhones and Android devices and TVs and Mac and Windows desktop apps, you have the capability to do that as a .NET C# developer. And what's great is that you have a big bulk of shared code. So things like your business logic, which would be your models, your view models, your RESTful service calls, databases, Azure integrations, other backend integrations, those would all be shared across the different applications. It also blends in, of course, cross-platform native user interface. So you can create a button or a label or an image or a text box, and it will display and render the native controls, but you're using a shared cross-platform API to do that. It also bundles in a bunch of great native capabilities that we're going to talk about today, but also enables you to access a bunch of different native features from a cross-platform API. So things like geolocation or connectivity, sensors, those are all handled cross-platform. And of course, resources like fonts and splash screens and images, and icons and raw assets and all sorts of things that are in there. Now, the important part is that you can see up top here, right? There's still like C# for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. And that is because .NET MAUI is built upon those native platforms, iOS for .NET, Android for .NET, and Mac OS for .NET, which were previously Xamarin.iOS, Xamarin.Android, Xamarin.Mac. So they have been all upgraded to .NET 6, and they are built on top of that native capability, which gives you access to the native APIs in C#. So if you want to do something, we got questions in the chat about, I want to access a voice recorder or sound system or want to play back audio. There may be an API built into .NET MAUI to handle that, like I was talking about. And if there's not, there's either a community plugin out there for it, or you can just access the iOS, Android, Mac, or Windows APIs directly, so you have full access to the capabilities of the devices. Now, for .NET MAUI, we use the latest technologies for each operating system. For iOS and Android, it's the core operating system that's there. For Mac OS, .NET MAUI applications are Mac Catalyst applications, which is sort of the route that Apple is going to deploy Mac applications. And it's sort of a optimized bundled iOS app with Mac OS features. And then on Windows, it is a WinUI 3 application powered by the Windows App SDK. So it's the latest and greatest in Windows technology. Now, .NET MAUI is a bunch of things. I mentioned that it's a bunch of pages and layouts and controls. It has a binding system, navigation, and animation API, dependency injection service, the same one as ASP.NET Core, continuous integration support, hybrid development support, which we'll talk about today, default themes, and a bunch more, right, built into the box. But as of today, I've only really talked about these two things separately, right? I've talked about Blazor over here, and I talked about .NET MAUI over here. But what we're here today to talk about is combining these two pieces of technology together, bringing Blazor into .NET MAUI to build and share components across web and build native hybrid applications for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows powered by .NET MAUI. And that is Blazor Hybrid. Blazor Hybrid is sort of that third option for Blazor that works across not only .NET MAUI, but also WPF and WinForms that enables you to bring those components into other .NET frameworks. So what that means is that if you are coming from the web world and you are looking to build applications, already have applications built with Blazor and .NET, you can now bring over a bulk of that logic and the UI, that web UI, into .NET MAUI. And I'm going to talk about today exactly how this works. And we're going to go ahead and build an application together so we can see it in real time. So you might be thinking, well, James, is this Blazor server? Is this Blazor WebAssembly? No, it's Blazor Hybrid. It's completely different. The cool part here is that there is no server. There is no WebAssembly. I'll make that very, very clear. No server, no WebAssembly. It's neither of those because it's called Blazor Hybrid. The cool part here is when you think about it is .NET MAUI, WinForms, WPF, they already have a .NET runtime that is bundled and compiled into the native application. So what happens here is Blazor Hybrid has a Blazor WebView component that each of those frameworks can use. So in .NET MAUI, it's a Blazor WebView that you can use as a control and load Blazor content. Then when Blazor in that instance wants to execute C# logic, it uses, or .NET logic, it uses the .NET runtime on that native application for .NET MAUI or for WinForms or for WPF. And then what it does, it uses the native WebView controls to render that HTML and all those different assets and CSS and anything else that you're doing. So on iOS and Android and Mac, it uses the native WebView controls there. And on Windows, it uses WebView 2. So the latest and greatest there. So you get all that good stuff that is there. So all sorts of good stuff. So what this means is that in this hybrid architecture, right, you have access to now bring in as much or as little shared Blazor components as you want. And we'll kind of talk about that today is you can build a 100% fully hybrid application and never worry about .NET MAUI UI at all. You can just use all of your components 100%, or you can mix and match those different pieces together to actually write more of a hybrid application where there's native UI and also hybrid UI as well. So good question here. Mike RDZ in the chat asks, I created a Blazor app. I'm looking at the starred chats here, Jamie and John, 1 year ago, and I would like to target Windows. Is it possible? Yes, with Blazor Hybrid, you can now take your Razor Blazor component libraries, Razor class libraries, and bring them over. Pretty much there. You can bring them over. And then you can target not only Windows, but Mac and other platforms too. And you can decide at that point, if you only need to target Windows and that's it, you could decide to, use .NET MAUI or WinForms or WPF based on your needs and your application. The advantage here is that compared to you can also do a progressive web app with Blazor too, right? But compared to a progressive web app, the nice thing about a native application is you can deploy it into the store, into your own private store internally. And of course, you can use the native capabilities under the hood. You're not restricted. You're not in a sandbox. You're sort of outside of that. And kind of to this point here, Abdul asks about, how do you bring in CSS and Razor class libraries into Blazor Hybrid is you create a Razor class library that has all of that stuff in it, and you share it with the .NET MAUI application or the Blazor application. So it should work exactly the same today as Blazor. So no difference in that regard. Yeah. So I think maybe before we build our first Blazor Hybrid application, Jamie, do you want to do some more questions that are maybe in the chat?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, are you ready for questions? Because we definitely have
think
a
so.
few. Okay, cool. I'll just start down the list as we got a few from the beginning of
Sure.
the show as well. So how can we access Bluetooth and Wi-Fi devices on the network in Maui on iOS and Android?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we kind of look at this architecture, I'm glad we still have the slides up. In general, there's two ways of doing it. So since Blazor hybrid apps are, built with .NET MAUI, leverage .NET MAUI capabilities, it means you have access to those underlying APIs. So we'll see today when we walk through the workshop of how to access the file system and different settings inside of it. But I'll also sort of talk about how to check Wi-Fi or connectivity or different things cross-platform. Additionally, like for Bluetooth is a good example, is there's many plugins out there, like a BLE plugin or Shiny is a good example of community projects and packages that you can just pull into .NET MAUI, and they've abstracted APIs for you. And in the case that there isn't one, so for example, like we haven't abstracted it, the team hasn't abstracted it and into .NET MAUI, there isn't a community package. The other thing you can do is just access the iOS and Android and Mac and Windows APIs directly in C# because you have access to those native capabilities in C#. So good question there.
Okay. And so that probably relates to the speaker and the mic for recording. And
Yep.
Okay, because we had another question about that.
Exactly.
Another question we have here is, will we get to see an example of customizing the non-client area of a window when targeting Windows and for Mac?
I'm not exactly sure what Humberto is asking, the non-client area. I think in that area, you still have access to those APIs in Mac and Windows. So there are some examples out there in the .NET MAUI samples repo of sort of accessing the, the settings or status bars and other things like that. But if you want to follow up with me, Humberto, I can definitely, you can tweet at me at James Montemagno, and I can answer a little bit more afterwards, or post another one with exactly what you mean.
Yeah. Perhaps non-client apps with Blazor.
Yeah.
We'll follow up. Another question that we have is, pardon me. Oh, here we go. So is there a performance issue in Blazor Hybrid when converting from Blazor syntax to native MAUI?
Yeah, great question. So, one specifically is that's not what it does. So let me be pretty clear about this in general. And you'll see today is in this form, right? There is a Blazor web view control that you use. So when you're building these applications with Blazor Hybrid and you're using your Blazor and your Razor components, those specifically are web UI. So inside of that, those are not native components. It's a web view, right? So in this example, you see it here. The difference is that you can blend in native controls. So you could have a native button on top and then the Blazor web view control, and you can share state between those different elements. Or a good example might be you're on page 1 that is fully native and it's a scrolling collection view of items. And when you tap on one, you go to details, and that's a Blazor web view control that is fully being shared with other components across there. So one would be fully native, and then one would be the Blazor stuff there. I would say as far as performance goes, I mean, .NET is super fast. These devices are super fast. The browsers are super fast. Rendering web controls and web views will always have somewhat of a performance indication. It's not a Blazor thing. It's a web view JavaScript-y thing that's happening in general. But the nice thing is that there is no additional overhead of a server or WebAssembly since .NET is running locally there. So they are quite fast in general.
Yeah.
Good question.
Speedy, Blazor quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it possible to access SQLite or a file system on Android using Blazor Hybrid?
Yes, totally. So we're actually going to access the file system today in the workshop. And then there is a SQLite-net, which is an open source cross-platform version of SQLite that runs everywhere, including inside of Blazor and, of course, Blazor Hybrid and .NET MAUI. So it runs everywhere. So yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions here.
Yeah.
So today, will we be explaining how to deploy authentication in DB to the hybrid architecture?
Not today. However, in the Blazor hybrid documentation, specifically, there's a section on that the team added, and they go through multiple scenarios and different libraries that you can use with Blazor hybrid. So check out the Blazor hybrid documentation on the Microsoft Docs. If we have a link, we'll drop that in there. But great question.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I have the link.
Yeah.
Oh no. Perhaps John, our amazing producer in the background, can pull that link. Also, if you go to the Let's Learn .NET Blazor Hybrid web page, it also has the link to all of the resources, the download, the documentation, the workshops we're walking through. So we'll share that in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to do one more question. Thank you. There we go. So yeah, all of the event resources can be found down there. I'm seeing a little bit of this. So is there an API available for the .NET MAUI Blazor for QR code scanning?
Yeah, great question. So here's what's really fascinating about this system is there's two kind of capabilities here. If you think about it, if there is a Blazor component today, it should just also work inside of a Blazor hybrid application. It's going to kind of depend. Like sometimes there's different permissions that you may need. So for example, like I just added a Blazor component that like allows you to like pick or take a photo, for example, with a camera. And as long as I had the correct permissions on it and I set that up ahead of time, it sort of worked fine. There may be some QR code scanning libraries for Blazor out there today that you could use. Some of those may just be only web. Some of them might, have some native capabilities in there. Jonathan Dick, who's the .NET MAUI team lead, has a Zebra Crossing.NET library. It's ZXING, Zebra Crossing one, and he has a new version. I think it's called like Big Island or something like that. It's still a work in progress, but you should be able to at least grab some of that code and figure out from there what's going on. But again, there's a lot more of these community packages kind of coming up in general. But good question. There's other vendors out there too, like Zebra itself, that have additional libraries usually as well. Good question.
Okay. Yeah. All righty. So we do have more questions, but let's see.
You do the Georgie's question? I like that one.
Yeah, let's pull this one up.
So Georgie was asking, I want to build a mobile app for games, a simple quiz. Should I use .NET MAUI, Blazor Hybrid, any of that stuff? Any app. You can build any app. That's easy. Anything you want to build. I think anything. Yeah. And, in general, like what I usually tell people in this scenario, right, is if you want to use like fully native controls and you want it to be, just 100% .NET MAUI, just be .NET MAUI. If you want it to be Blazor Hybrid, like do it there, right? You're totally good to go. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of options here.
Yeah.
All righty. So do you want to get started as we actually kind of dive into the workshop?
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, so for those of us who are just joining us now, don't worry, we haven't actually started the Learn module. We've just been kind of going over the briefing for Blazor Hybrid in .NET MAUI and the basic gists for that. So now we're going to get started with the actual Learn module, and I will let James take that away.
Cool. Yes, so we'll share a link for the Learn module, but the easiest way to get there is if you go to docs.microsoft.com, you can click on Learn, and that's going to take you here. So I'm just logged into an incognito browser, but you can come to products and there's .NET. And this is pretty cool. So you can see not only is there a big .NET MAUI Focus event coming up, but additionally, we have all of these collections. So you can learn to build .NET apps, C# apps, Blazor applications, ASP.NET Core applications, microservices, and .NET MAUI apps. So if you are like, hey, I just want to start learning this stuff, like this is a good place to start learning MAUI and start learning Blazor. You can also then click this browse all and you can type in hybrid. So if you tap on that, you're going to see the Blazor hybrid Learn module here. So build a mobile and desktop app with Blazor hybrid. Now you can do Learn modules with or without being logged in. If you do log in, you get like different points and levels and upgrade systems and things like that as you complete your Learn modules on your way, which is pretty cool. And I should also say here, if you go to this browse section here, and if I was just to show you all, there's like over 100 .NET specific or tagged things, but you can also come in and you can say, oh, give me only Blazor, give me only .NET MAUI, and the Blazor hybrid one will be in both of them because it's both .NET MAUI and Blazor, which is cool. So what we're going to learn today in this objective as we go through is we're going to learn how to configure our local environment for Blazor hybrid development. We're going to talk about the basics of architecture of a Blazor hybrid app. We're going to create a new app. We're going to add some logic to our app, but we're also going to access some platform features for mobile and desktop with .NET MAUI. And then we're going to deploy our app, of course, from Visual Studio. So the biggest part here is that you will need to install Visual Studio 2022 with the .NET MAUI workload. And specifically, it will be the Visual Studio 2022 preview is what you'll need because that's where .NET MAUI is found today in the preview version of Visual Studio 2022 or Visual Studio 2022 for Mac. So those are both options there. And you just hit start on here and we're going to start it up. So we walked through many of this earlier, so we don't need to necessarily go through all of the introductory parts. So we're going to actually just go through the exercises today. But if you want to always go back and revisit any of these different concepts, the nice thing about Learn modules is that they are set up to kind of do some learning, then go and do something, do some learning, and then go and do something. So inside of here, we can look at the units and you can see here that there's literally an introduction. What is Blazor Hybrid? Go and do something. We're going to create an app. What is Razor Components? Let's go and do something. What are data binding and events in Blazor Hybrid? Let's go and do something as we go on and on and on. So that's kind of cool in general as we go through this. So here, of course, we're kind of just going to talk about exactly what I was mentioning earlier about what Blazor Hybrid is, the learning objectives, but let's just go ahead and get started here. All right. So we've already covered what Blazor Hybrid is and what Blazor is. And you can see there's some beautiful screenshots here from exactly what we just talked about in the slides. And it even talks about what .NET MAUI is exactly right here and how it's built on .NET. Now, I mentioned earlier here that we're going to be using either Visual Studio 2022 for Windows or for Mac. And specifically, we're going to use the preview version over here. Now we're going to go ahead and walk through the exercise. And the first one is creating and running our Blazor hybrid application. So we can see specifically here, it tells us our exact requirements, Visual Studio version 17.3 preview here, and the specific workloads that we'll need to install on our machine. So if you already have the Visual Studio installer, we'll go ahead and open this up over here. Here you can use Visual Studio 17.3. I have the community edition, so that obviously version works perfectly well. And then here I'm going to hit modify so you can see exactly what I have installed. Now, of course, you can install multiple things. I have not only the ASP.NET workloads, I can do Blazor and Blazor hybrid stuff. But I also have the Azure SDK, development tools. I have desktop, UWP, and .NET MAUI. I have all the things installed. But the only one you need is just this one. And then, of course, I recommend the ASP.NET and web development because probably also want to do Blazor development as well. So just those two would be the main ones that you need in general. Now, when we are doing this, here, we're going to focus on deploying just to Windows and Android. And I know that there was a question in the chat from Mert about how to deploy to iOS and macOS. And that's a great question in general. So there's sort of two ways of doing that three ways of doing that. One, if you're on a Mac, you can install Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, and then you'd have iOS, Android, and macOS. And of course, for Windows, you need Windows, and for Mac, you need a Mac. Now, if you're on Windows and you're installing and using Visual Studio 2022 preview like I am, then you will be able to deploy to Windows and Android immediately. Or you can also do one of two things for iOS. For iOS deployment, you can actually connect remotely to a Mac. So if you have a Mac on your network, like this here, my MacBook Air, you can connect remotely. And then what's nice about that is it will do a remote build and compilation, and there's a remoted iOS simulator that'll pop up on your Windows machine. The other option is a feature called Hot Restart that enables you to plug an iPhone into your Windows device, but you also need an Apple developer account to kind of get that setup working, but it does allow you to deploy there. So there we go. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this on another monitor so you can follow along at home, but you'll see exactly what I'm doing here. But I guess I can do it right here. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Visual Studio 2022 and I'm going to say create new project. And there's a few options here. So there's all projects. So there's all the different things. You see Blazor server. You can actually go to Blazor itself. And here you'd see Blazor server, Blazor WebAssembly, and .NET MAUI Blazor app. That's the Blazor hybrid app that is powered by .NET MAUI. The other thing that you may note, and there was a question about Razor class libraries. We just typed in Razor, for example, here. There's a Razor class library, and that is the same exact project template that you would use to share with a .NET MAUI app or a Blazor app. So there's no specific .NET MAUI or Blazor hybrid Razor class library. It's just a Razor class library. So if you have Razor class libraries today, they're the same exact ones that you would use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in what it says up here, which is .NET MAUI Blazor. There we go. And we can see the first one is .NET MAUI Blazor. So let's go ahead and create that. And we're going to call this Blazor app. Like that. So that's what I believe it says to call it. Oh, Blazor hybrid app. Okay, so we're going to do Blazor hybrid app. There we go. Perfect. And then now what we're going to do is go ahead and create this. It's going to go ahead and ask us for .NET 6 support. That's what it supports. And we're going to hit create. It already exists. So let me go ahead and delete it. Okay, because I did this demo earlier. Let me delete it. Perfect. Delete, delete, delete. And now I can create it. Perfect. I knew that was going to happen. So awesome. Cool. All right. So what this is going to do is it's going to create my project. And what it's going to show us is something that might look similar to Blazor applications if you're coming from that world. And also might look a little bit similar for .NET MAUI if you try that out at all. But I want to walk through the infrastructure and environment here for a Blazor hybrid application. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in over here. And what I want to show you is that there is a single project and single solution for this application. So we not only have our Blazor hybrid app, we also have all of our dependencies. And this is unique because this application is multi-targeted with .NET MAUI. So it is a .NET MAUI application, and it targets Android, iOS, Mac Catalyst, and Windows, which is pretty cool. Now, inside of here, there's some additional like launch setting properties that you might be familiar with. But there's also things like data, pages, platforms or resources, shared, and a dub root. And I'm going to go through all of this. So let's take a look from the start. The first thing is data. So this actually is using the same exact Blazor infrastructure and code from if you did a brand new Blazor app, which has a few tabs and has a weather area on there, but it has a simple weather object. So here I can go ahead and move this out of the way. But we see a weather forecast, date, time, temperature Fahrenheit, and a summary. There's a forecast service. So this goes off and it gets some forecast over here, and it goes and gets some different data. And then we also have some pages. So this is just straight up Razor pages inside of here. So there's a index.razor, fetch data. So these are Razor pages for Blazor. So if you've ever looked at a Blazor application, these are going to look exactly the same. So here, for example, we have the counter page. It has some HTML in here, and then it also has our C# code that Blazor will execute directly in our web page. So for example, we have an on-click event here for our HTML button, and I increment the count. It has some CSS styling on here. And when that is clicked, it will call increment count. It will increment this count. And then here with this little data binding, it's going to increment that count for us, which is pretty cool. Same thing, fetch data is it's just using some very simple HTML components and Razor syntax to automatically go in, display a table with weather data. And here it's just using simple .NET to load data from that forecast. Now over here is where it gets pretty fascinating because we have these platform folders. And this is where the .NET MAUI stuff with platforms and resources comes in. Here we have all of the infrastructure needed to boot up Android, iOS, Mac, Windows, and Tizen, which is a platform from Samsung that they support on their different devices with .NET MAUI. So inside of here are anything specific. They're just C# classes or different things specific for Android, iOS, Mac, or Windows. So for Android, for example, there's a little bit of Android startup logic written in C#. So here I have Android things like the Android runtime. I could say using Android dots, and I have things like the native Android Bluetooth or database or graphics systems or media systems here available to me, all inside of this folder. There's very little code, but this is sort of just some infrastructure and scaffolding that is needed there. There's also some manifest files that basically enable you to set permissions for your application, and the same thing true for iOS, Mac, and of course Windows. These are just basically little starter applications that'll be deployed for those specific platforms. Now, inside of resources, these are resources specific for the app and for .NET MAUI things. So, for example, for the application itself, there are things such as app icons, which are like SVGs that are loaded. There are splash screens that are generated automatically. And then there are embedded raw assets like text files or databases or JSON feeds, and then things like fonts and images. And these fonts or images would be ones that are used in native controls with .NET MAUI. Whereas if you have controls for your Blazor app, they're going to go into this dub root folder. So here we can see CSS with Bootstrap and Open Iconic, the font that's here and all the different things. So you're kind of blending those two worlds together based if you're using those things in the native world or in the web world. We also have shared. So this is just main infrastructure coming from the Blazor infrastructure. So there's like a navigation system, a survey prompt component that is reused in different areas, and a little bit more. Now, inside of here, additionally, are like a main MAUI program. So the main MAUI program is similar to the program file in a Blazor application, and it's sort of the startup of the app. So when the app goes to start, it goes here, and we can see that it uses a very similar host builder pattern from ASP.NET Core. And what's great here is that that means that it is going to use the same exact service models, dependency injection models that you're used to when you are coming from Blazor or ASP.NET Core. So here we can see that the builder is starting up using an app. It's configuring fonts. There's lifecycle events. There's all sorts of things in there. And then it's starting up and injecting into the services the MAUI Blazor web view. And it's also here, if in debug mode, it's enabling the Blazor web view developer tools because you don't want those in runtime. It's you want to turn those off. And then additionally, it is registering that weather forecast service that will be used in that Razor page that we saw earlier from Blazor. Now, here we can see that this thing is loading up the Maui app. So we kind of like go down the rabbit hole of how this goes. Here we have the app file, and this app file is just a little bit of styling for different things in a .NET MAUI application. But the code behind is saying, hey, when you load this app, program file, create a main page. And that main page here is a .NET MAUI page. So you have the program, which loads the app, which loads the page that's going to start with the application. And we can see that this is XAML. So this is .NET MAUI XAML. You could also write this in C# as well. It's up to you. But what we can see is that it's a main content page. So that means you can have multiple different things inside of here. Like you can have not only just this Blazor web view control, but you could also, for example, have native controls as well. So if you open up this toolbox over here, I should show up. Maybe the toolbox isn't showing up, but if I just go in and start writing some stuff, we can see that I have access to a bunch of different .NET MAUI controls, like a border, a button, a carousel view, collection view, date pickers, entries, ellipses, graphics views, stack panels, images, all the native controls that are there. Now, this application, though, just uses the Blazor web view, and that's it. So there's one Blazor web view that is hosting this page, and specifically a component, which is the main component. And that main component lives over here. And this main component is coming in, sort of setting up some scaffolding and infrastructure for our Blazor application that's going to load our main layout and our navigation. So if I actually load the nav menu here, this is what's going to be loaded from Blazor. So here we have our Blazor nav bar up here. There's a toggler. There is a few different pages inside of here, such as our index page, our counter page right here, and then also our fetch data page. So there's a little bit of logic to collapse and non-collapse the page as well, which is cool. So that's how that is loading up there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come up to this debug menu up here. And this is actually very unique. So if you're coming from the Blazor world, you normally just hit go and it would deploy into a browser, but we're going to deploy into Windows, Android, or if you wanted to connect to your Mac or plug in an iPhone device, you could deploy to those different operating systems like iOS, simulators, or devices. Here, what this is going to enable me to do is toggle between the different frameworks. And those frameworks are coming from this CS proj files. This is something that's really important inside of here. So I'm going to drop this down. And what we can see is that this application is targeting Android, iOS, Mac. And if we're on Windows, it's going to also add the Windows target there, which is really nice. And if I had Tizen tooling installed and wanted to deploy to Tizen, I could add that as well. Here, this is not only adding multiple targets. So if you never want to deploy to Mac or to iOS, you could remove those, for example, or you could just leave them. It's not going to hurt anything. But we can also see that it's using, the Razor project system from .NET. It's using the single project and using .NET MAUI. It's using some default CSS items. But what's also cool here is that it is displaying our name. So here we have our application title, our application identifier, our application ID GUID. We have version numbers that are in here, and .NET MAUI is, for all intents and purposes, handling that for us. So it is basically it is handling all of this cross-platform complexity for us automatically. It also handles our icons, our splash screens, our images, fonts, and assets, all right here. So you can go in and tweak and change these different things. If you want to change the splash screen or change the colors, you can change all of that here, which is quite nice. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit debug here, and this is going to build and compile our Blazor hybrid application for Windows, and we should go ahead and see it running. So I'm going to run it not only on Windows, but I'll also run it on Android as well and talk about what's happening in that instance there. So let me see here. Should just go ahead and compile up and then deploy. Now it might give me an error because I did deploy this earlier, so I might need to change a name or two. We'll see if that is the case, but oh no, it just runs perfect. Amazing. Cool. So here is our native Blazor hybrid application. So we can see that I'm inside of a Windows application. So it's inside of here. It works. There we go. Thank you for the confetti. And I can pin it to the taskbar. I can do all that stuff. It's all right there. Now here, like I mentioned, there's the 3 pages. So home, counter. If I go ahead and click on that, we can see that I have this counter here. I have fetch data, so I can see my weather forecast that's coming in. I can also shrink it down, and we can see that I have my full responsive UI that's inside of here automatically just using CSS. So there's no native UI here. It's just simply, controls coming in here. Now, what's nice though is that if I wanted to, I can of course change any of this stuff too. So I can do a few bits of different capabilities. I can actually come in and I can use this live preview here. This is a feature of Visual Studio on Windows that enables me to put an actual image of it here inside of it, which is nice. And if I wanted to go into, let's say let me go into my Solution Explorer and go into my pages and my counter page here, for example, I could, come in, I could go ahead and hit that breakpoint. I get the exact breakpoints debugging that I would expect inside of there. I can also come in and, right now we just have this, incrementer. I could change this to plus equals 10. And then I could hit this little hot reload button here. And that's going to go ahead and hot reload that code for me. So now we can see it's incrementing by 10 every single time. So you can really go in, you can change your UI, you can change all those different bits and pieces and have them update there too. If I went into my index, for example, and now put that counter control over here, so there's that counter component, I should say, and go over to the home page, we can now see it's over there too. So that's kind of cool. So we're sharing that counter component in both places. Now, if I do want to go ahead and run this on Android, I'm going to stop debugging and I'm going to go ahead and change the framework to Android. I can also just look at the Android emulators that are there. I'm just going to go ahead and change it to Android. And Visual Studio, if you have an emulator, will go ahead and select one for you. You can also set one up over here. You can also go to Tools, Android, and look at the different device managers or SDKs, and it'll handle everything for you if you're missing any of that stuff. If you're on Windows 11 and you're in a location where Windows subsystem for Android is available, you can actually deploy to WSA directly on your machine as well. So that's an option. I have a video on the .NET YouTube, which is where you may be watching this right now currently. So this is now going to go ahead and compile up. I just hit debug my Android application with my changes. The first time I do this, it's going to take maybe about a minute or so. It's going to start my emulator up. This is a previous app that I had running, which is just a .NET MAUI application. And then it's going to deploy it to my emulator. But it's going to do a full compilation, package up my Android app, and then deploy it. So like I said, this takes the first time maybe 30 to 60 seconds based on how fast your machine is. I'm on now a relatively older machine. It's like a 6 series Intel. So it's, five generations ago, but it does have a lot of RAM. So we're just going to let it kind of build and compile up here. But we're going to see what questions I have here. Let's go ahead and tap on, I can't tap on it, but maybe Zap from London over here was asking, well, in this Blazor hybrid app, is it using different web view rendering platforms? Yeah, great question. So we'll see here if I just tap on the Windows app, this is going to be using whatever the, of course, my machine is going to slow down, so my webcam may slow down as well. There too, it's going to town compiling, that's for sure. There we go. Perfect. As they just hide it from me. Perfect. So on Windows, it's going to use WebView 2. So it's going to use the the native bits and pieces there. And if Alon's just hopping on, Alon can hop in and answer these questions too. I don't know if he's just backstage hiding from everybody. He built the thing. He's muted, but he's there.
Oh, hello. Hi.
Oh, hello.
Yes.
Hi, friend.
I wasn't hiding. I was hanging out with my fellow YouTubers on the YouTube chat.
Nice. So do you want to answer that question about how the web views are handled on each platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like any .NET MAUI component, whether it's your simple button or label or the more kind of richer controls like the MAUI shell control or the Blazor WebView control, which is also a MAUI component, on each platform, we have slightly different code that runs. Most of the code is common, but then we, on each platform, configure and set up the appropriate native components to actually get the pixels on the screen. Ultimately, what is your application if there's no pixels? So on, as James was saying, on Windows, it uses the Edge WebView 2 control to get that running. And on Android, it uses the Chromium or Chrome-based WebView, I forget the name, the Android WebView. And on Mac OS, Mac Catalyst, and iOS, it uses the WK, the WebKit WebView, I think is what that one's called. And they all have very similar APIs, but ultimately the Blazor WebView makes sure that all the right HTML and CSS and JavaScript and everything is kind of plumbed in and all the right events are handled. So as you're clicking through the user interface that you've built inside that WebView, inside that rectangle, that all the right .NET code runs as a result of that and communicates everything.
Yeah. So I think now we have this deployed, so we can see it up on Windows, and then now we can also see it running on Android as I not only stream and share my screen and do all this stuff, and run an emulator too. We get the same exact thing. Now the difference, right, is that we have this running in the Android web view. So we have this running, but it's the exact same, application basically running here. Look at that magic. Akash asks, why is it hybrid? Do you want to answer why it's hybrid? I think I hopefully did, but maybe I didn't specifically go deep enough on the hybrid bit and piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So hybrid, well, it's a word. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. So it's kind of one of those things. This is the most hybrid Blazor and MAUI ever that we've ever released. What does it mean? Hybrid usually in this context means it's mixing web UI. When I say web UI, that doesn't mean a website with HTTP and request response, but web UI meaning HTML and CSS to put the pixels on the screen. But in the context of running in a native platform application. So what James has running on the screen there, that's a real Windows application. There's an exe file that's running, that's your application. On that Android application, that's a real Android application. There's a APK.
Mm-hmm.
APK. Yeah, I should remember. That should be easy. Android.
Well, there's an IPA for iOS. That's why.
I'm never going to learn this. I'll just have a cheat sheet on my wall printed out. And so it's a genuine Android application. This application, it is a true native Android application. But what's hybrid about it? Well, the UI is not rendering Android controls. That's not an Android button. That's not an Android grid. That's not an Android label. That's an HTML label to get the pixels on the screen itself. And that's all a hybrid application is. It's mixing web-based UI, that meaning using HTML and CSS to get the pixels on the screen for an otherwise native application.
Yeah. And I think the important part there, because I think Jose on the bottom here was asking, is this a web view or is it native? Well, it's both. It's native and this is a web view right inside of it. So you can access native capabilities. You can blend native controls with the web view, like Alon just sort of said, or you can be 100% web view, right? Some developers are coming from the web world. They don't want to mix and match. They just want it all to be web stuff. Like if I really wanted to, let me just show you what that would look like is I could go into this main page and I could come in and I could say, wow, there's this web view here. It's a Blazor web view. I could come in and say, well, let me add a grid instead of just adding one control. And a grid enables you to do columns and rows. And I'm going to do, row definitions, and I'll say auto and star. And then I'll say grid.row of 1. And then I'm going to add a button here. And I'm going to say text native button here. hit save. I think I need to like redeploy this. Let me just go ahead and redeploy this. But what you will see is I'm just going to close out all this other junk that I have is if we look at what I literally just created in my XAML here, .NET MAUI XAML, is there's two controls, right? There is a button control, and that's a .NET MAUI button, and that's going to render a native button at the end of the day. And then there's a Blazor web view control, which is going to size itself inside of this grid and display whatever Blazor web content I want inside of that. Did I accurately say that, Alon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll let this recompile up and spin up again on my machine that I apparently now need to build a brand new one for. So, and yeah, Jose asked about performance. Well, I sort of covered this a little bit here is, you know, when you're rendering and pulling up web view and web components, I mean, these things are pretty fast in general, right? But yeah, rendering and pulling up the browser is going to have the browser or the web view control overhead of loading whatever it does on the operating system. But as far as like actually rendering the native or the web UI, like that's really, really fast. Is that accurate, Alon? I know I'm a little freezy because I'm building.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's as Jim was saying, there's kind of two sides to the story. One is the calls for like the backend application, the logic of your application, the whatever you're calculating, the web request you're making. That's just .NET code it's running essentially natively on the device in various ways. And so whether it's a hybrid application or some other kind of .NET MAUI application or a Xamarin Forms application, it's the exact same .NET running all of those. And so that should be full speed, you know, blazing fast. And then there's the UI, like what's the efficiency of putting the pixels on the screen? So your application said, I want a button here, a label there, a grid over here, and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, my answer to that is if you think that the web browser on your device is slow, then you might have some performance problem there. Like if just like the regular web, if you're running Chrome or Edge or Safari on whatever the device is, your iPhone or Android tablet or MacBook M2, whatever thing, those should all be quite fast because those are extremely optimized pieces of application. And this is using exactly those same components. The same component that's used in Safari on your Mac, your regular desktop Mac, to render a web page is the same component that's used for a Mac hybrid application as well. It's that same component. The one advantage that this has is that all the HTML and CSS that's in this application, it's your HTML and CSS. Now, if you go to a random, let's say, news website or whatever website, and you see what's loaded into those applications, I don't want to get into a discussion about like tracking and spyware and all that kind of stuff, but you're better off not looking at how much stuff is being loaded into when you go to your favorite news website's homepage or whatever social media site. It's making 100 different requests for images and CSS and JavaScript and all that stuff. Yet they actually tend to render pretty fast despite all of that. Now consider that for your application here, unless you're doing something kind of weird, it's just your HTML for your application. Like you're generally not going to have like tons of like advertising or other kinds of things in there. You can have those if you want, but you're generally not going to have those things. So it's really just your HTML, your UI, your CSS, your application. And so if you think that the performance of the browser on that given platform is reasonable, then this should be at least as good, which is to say, I wouldn't be particularly worried about anything. Now, if your UI has a page with a grid with 10 million rows of HTML on it, it's probably going to be slow, but you probably shouldn't have a page with 10 million rows of HTML for a table in HTML. There are much better ways to do that with virtualized UI or have a pager. It's just not a good UI to have to begin with. Yeah. How can you possibly interact with that? So I think for any reasonable application, there should be no particular performance problem here. And even if you are experiencing something, there are tools to analyze the performance of the application and say like, I think it's kind of rendering a little slow when I get to this page. When I do this interaction, I'm not getting the performance I expect. There are tools, both in Visual Studio and the web developer tools, that are used to debug and analyze what's going on inside that web view to create an analysis and see where the hotspots are in your application.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And the same can be true for native applications too, with or without .NET MAUI. Is like you can create a non-performant, app. There's plenty of apps I use on my phone that are native or hybrid or that, and they're made by, unicorn companies that aren't the most performant thing in the world, right? Performance is in the eye of the beholder sometimes.
It is. And can I say that people should be careful asking me questions, because I'm going to give like 10-minute answers to every question. So,
well,
be prepared to listen on like replay to like internalize everything that we're saying.
Well, we got 50 minutes left, and we're totally going to get through this because I think that so far we're 10 minutes in an hour and a half in. So, but here I just wanted to show you, right? So this is a native button. This is a web button. This is you can see the web view. I've spaced them out so you can literally see the spacing here. But this is a native button, and this is the web component. You can have multiple, Blazor web view controls as well. Like if I, wanted to, I could, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but this would be cool if it did, without having to reload it. I'm curious. I think it has to like reload the state of it. But so, for example, like I could put in multiple Blazor web views, and I could put in, native components in between that. I don't know if you'd want to do that, but you can. I'm doing it, and Alon can't stop me.
This is perfectly legit. We talked before. We call this sometimes like the term doesn't apply here as well, but we call it like islands of richness. Though here it's not necessarily about richness, but it's just islands of Blazor scattered throughout your MAUI application. MAUI itself being an island, so this is very meta. This is like some kind of fractal. I don't know. I'll cut myself off right there.
All right, let's continue on then. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back to its original state. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this stuff that we put in there. So there we go. Now it's going to look good. I can leave orange as the background. You're not going to see it. So let's go back over to here. And we've basically completed this section. So we learned all about this stuff. I told you all about this stuff. Wow, so much code. We ran the app. Amazing. Now, so far, we've talked a little bit about Razor, and we've talked about some of the things that you see. And inside of here, we've tested out the counter. So we did this, which is cool. We incremented the counter here. And what we can see is that what happened is when we incremented that counter, this logic got ran right here. So we can see, for example, we have the increment count. It updated the count. And sure enough, it updated there. So this is going to outline what it does, which is cool. So I guess I should have ran through this, but I did run through it ahead of time. So I ran through these things. So let's see if Alon can answer these questions. And feel free in the chat, wherever you're at, to put A, B, C, D, E, or 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever you want. Blazor hybrid apps use which .NET runtime? Is it the runtime provided by the browser? Is it the .NET runtime deployed natively with your app? Is it a JavaScript runtime deployed with your app? Or is it WebAssembly that's deployed with your app in a Blazor hybrid application?
Yeah, this is a fascinating question. This is one of the things when I'm talking about Blazor hybrid, I probably spend 10 minutes just on this one topic. So if you've watched any talk that I've been in previously about Blazor hybrid, you should know the answer. But if you're new to this, we're gonna spend 15 minutes on this topic.
I had some slides on it too, so hopefully there we got. Some people said 4, some people said 2, another person said 2 or B, 2 or B. I don't know. I should put A, B, C, D inside of here, but yeah. What do you think it is, Alon? You know what it is.
Well, I just want to say what you can do is you can press F12 and you can edit the HTML. You can right-click inspect the elements inside, on the web page, and you can put an A, B, C, D in there if you want.
Oh,
that's the beauty. So right-click inspect and edit the HTML.
I'm not going to do that. Element. Some people are saying 2 and 4 JavaScript runtime.
Yeah, those seems to be the two big choices here. So either .NET runtime deployed natively within your application or WebAssembly runtime deployed in your app. People are not going for browser runtime or JavaScript runtime. Very interesting. Well, there's actually a big hint here, and it boils down to what kind of an application is a Blazor hybrid application, and they are native applications. Applications. And so Hopefully that kind of helps people kind of gravitate towards, and I think probably most people picked probably B, but there are quite a few people considering option D, the WebAssembly option. But B is definitely the right answer. It's the .NET runtime that is deployed natively with your application. These are native applications.
Yep.
Yes, there is some JavaScript that's running in there. Yes, there is a browser component running in there. Yes, you could have some WebAssembly code running in there, but that is not the nature of the application. It is a native application. All of the .NET code in your application, every line of C# that you're running, whether it's in a .razor file as part of the Razor component, whether it's a custom .NET MAUI native control that you've written, or in a view model for the XAML parts of your application, that's all native, running on whatever the .NET runtime is that's deployed natively in your app.
Perfect. All right. We'll have to answer the second one before we can check that. I'm pretty sure that's accurate, but we'll see. I did write this module.
I did run the quiz myself yesterday,
Okay.
just to make sure the right
I got it
answer
right.
was in fact highlighted correctly.
Yeah. All right. Blazor UI, how is that typically defined? As Razor components with a mix of HTML and C#, as XAML pages using XML, or in C# defined in .NET Standard libraries? Well, the key here is the Blazor UI and not the .NET MAUI UI. So .NET MAUI UI, if you remember here, what we're seeing is that this is in XAML. .NET MAUI UI is in C# or in XAML. Whereas if we look specifically at the Blazor UI components, what is this? It's a mix of HTML and C#. So hey, let's check our answers. We did it. Thanks, John.
We should each get 200 XP. It's not fair only you get 200 XP.
You can go through this. You can sign in. I'm going to continue without progress. So those XP will just go into the ether after this.
Oh, man.
Oh, I know.
Well, again, it's an HTML page. You can just right click on the element and just give yourself 10 million XP until you refresh the page.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue on here. So we added our component over here. So I'm going to snap these over here. Let's do this. And let's make this small. Oh, let's make this small. It's as small as it'll go. Perfect. Awesome. So this is kind of cool. I'm going to do this side by side. This is how I would actually do it, except for I'd be on an ultra wide monitor, 1920 by 1080. So we've added our component over here into our main page. So let me go into our index.razor. We've added the counter. Here, what we've seen is if we're debugging and we increase it, we can get it up and running and going. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to run this now on Windows, and we can do that in a bit. So we get the counter there. But let's modify that component. So we're going to learn a little bit about how do we actually change this to not increase it by 1 or 10 every time, but increase it a little bit different by passing in a parameter into this counter. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to create a new property called increment amount. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to say public int here, and I'll say 1 as the default. That sounds good. Oh, I guess I need to do a get set property. There we go. Set that equal to 1 as the default. There you go. There you go, right there. And we're going to add this parameter on top of that. That's what we're going to do. Now, Alon, what does that parameter do? That's an attribute, correct?
Right. That's a C# attribute that Blazor provides so that you can specify. I mean, this might be spoiling the very next thing, but basically lets you specify what are the publicly settable properties of this Razor component. So James has this counter component that he's reused already on the main page of the application, and he wants to make things configurable. Well, Blazor doesn't just let you set anything on that component. You have to specify things as being a parameter, and that's what tells Blazor to allow that to be set whenever the component is used in another page.
So that's pretty cool. It enables me to add very easily new properties on said component. So now what I can do here is I can go ahead and say plus equals, and I can change that to increment amount. So now we're not just randomly changing stuff. We can do that there. Now my machine is being odd. I don't know what it's doing. Is it building? No. it was definitely being odd. I'm going to close the Android emulator just for now because it is kind of being odd. But let's go ahead and see if that goes ahead and fixes up. My machine is purring. It's making loud purr noises. So we'll see if that's going to save state there. Let's go get rid of that. Go.
Yeah, I have to
Cool.
say, streaming while running an emulator and
Yeah.
a bunch of other things all at the same time, that's
Windows update.
is asking a lot of.
So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into here, and now I can say increment amount. I'm going to say equals 10 over here. But if we remember on the counter page, it's going to default to should just default to 1 right here, which is great. I'm going to make sure that I copied this correct. I definitely did. I'm just going to copy it just in case. I don't know what it's doing. All right, Visual Studio is being odd. I feel like it's oddly compiling something weird. I don't know what. I'm going to save and inspect really quick. This is very odd. Okay. Let me go ahead and save these files, and I'm going to go ahead and close Visual Studio and reopen it, and I'm not sure what it's doing. Okay. Let me go ahead and shut it down really quick. I feel like maybe there's a lingering task of something doing something on my machine. Which doesn't seem ideal. Okay, let me go ahead and open this app again. There we go. Everything seems 1,000 times faster now. So we'll see how that goes. So, okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. So what I should be able to do in this case is come in and start debugging. And we should see this parameter light up to increment our count over there. Let's see. See if this is going to work. Okay, cool. Things are happening. Okay, calm down, Windows. Oh, it's still loading. So let's go ahead and give it a second here to load up. See, even the pros run into issues, as Alon knows. Not that Alon ever has issues at all, ever.
Never, unheard of.
No. Someone was asking about how big are applications in general with .NET MAUI and Blazor Hybrid. Well, I guess it's kind of a combination of the two, right? So you have both not only the .NET MAUI app, but you also have the Blazor components in general. So in general, .NET MAUI applications are natively compiled up and deployed. I don't know what's happening on my machine. It's being weird.
Task manager destroyed.
Yeah, destroy the world. And it goes through a native compilation step in general. I wonder if like MS Build is just, nope, not hanging around. In general, cool. All right. So they go through a native compilation step and full LLVM, IoT, AOT compilation on your machine. So what happens in general is that those all get packaged up and deployed natively for iOS, Android, Mac, or Windows. So what's nice about that is it gets to take advantage of the different capabilities. It's like Android app packages, app bundles, and of course, iOS bundling. And then really it's just like how much web content do you have? So as far as like size, it's not necessarily very large. It sort of depends. But remember, the nice thing is that it's not the entire operating system or .NET SDK that's being deployed. It is just a very slim, lightweight .NET runtime that's usually only a few megs that get bundled into your application. So that's an important part to kind of remember there. when you're doing that. So that's one thing to kind of remember, that in general, like my applications on Android are like, I don't know, 15 to 20 megabytes. I don't know. I actually also, here's my general James tip. This is not an officially sanctioned Elan Microsoft thing. It doesn't matter because it matters, and they will be small, right? Based on what your requirements are. If you need to have a very, very slim application, you can do that. Now, if you start adding tons of stuff into your application and tons of packages, extensions, and all this other stuff, it can get larger, right? And that's not, .NET MAUI or Blazor Hybrid's fault. It can just get large. Like Alon was saying, it was like you can add the world. When I updated Instagram, it was like half a gig. So it's, it really depends on what you're going for. So you can totally make slim packages, but of course you can always inflate them as well. Anyways, here we go. We got it working. It working. Now my machine is like way faster. Alon, I don't know what you did, but it was magic.
You deserve like double confetti for that. John, can we get a double confetti? Or I don't know if you like balloons or something.
I thought he was going to slime me for a bit.
Oh my gosh. Look at that. That's beautiful. And then like in real life, show up behind James at his place of living and like,
oh my goodness,
pop a confetti thing. Maybe not that one, not like the explosions.
So this is pretty cool, right? So now we get these components in here. If I came in to my index razor and change this to, I don't know, so many, this should now, if I click off and on, we can see that's incrementing by 1010 every single time. So many numbers being added there over and over and over again. Amazing. So I can increment those different properties. So that's how these different components work. Ooh, easy. All right, data binding. So far what we've done is we've learned about just adding the components, adding properties to that component. But what's great here is that we can also access different Razor directives. So their component markup used in C# and HTML that help us, have our different code blocks. So we can see inside of our Razor here, we can see our code block here. There's also function methods and expression things and things like that. The important part that this is pointing out is that there's this Razor data binding system. So remember, whenever I was calling on click, we saw that at current count was updated. There's also an at bind markup that enables us to bind a C# variable in HTML input as well. So for example, here, this is just output, but what if we have input? Like I'm going to enter something into a text box. So we can do that in the next module. So what we're now going to do is we're going to stop debugging. And instead of just messing around with this counter, we're going to actually add an entire new to-do page. Who doesn't love a to-do, Alon?
I always have so many things to do. And I love that Blazor is the thing that I do. And I get to build a to-do app using Blazor.
There you go. So now here's what's fascinating. In this module, we just have you create the to-do page inside of the Blazor application. But if you wanted to, you could create a new Razor class library, add all of the functionality into it as added as a dependency of the hybrid application. And you could also then share that to the internet or share it to your Blazor applications as well, right? So it's kind of up to you. I know someone was asking in the chat a while ago if there's any plans on creating a template that creates the Blazor app, Blazor hybrid app, and a Razor class library. Alon and I've talked about it for 2 years. Alon, any change there?
We do not currently have a template that does that. So it's a lovely idea. I love the idea of having more advanced project templates that include multiple projects. The challenge we have is how to kind of present that to the user in the right way. We know that for a lot of people, this is kind of diving now deep into like product design and less is more. We want to have a good experience for users to do that. We're trying to balance folks coming into this experience and trying to learn like, why are there 7 projects and how do I update my code in here and where do I go and everything looks the same? It's confusing. That's a real experience, a negative experience somebody might have if they come to it. On the other hand, some people say, quite reasonably, but I really want my code in a separate class library. Why isn't there just a checkbox or something like that by default? And we have to design those things and come up with a good experience for that, which right now we haven't had the time to build any experience that we think kind of would be the right experience for that. So you can do it yourself for right now. It is a few steps. Fortunately, you don't have to do it very often. It's how often are you creating? It's folks like James and myself. We're at Razor class library 993 and
Yeah.
Maui app 722. So we're creating them a lot.
Yeah.
Most people, I think, are not creating them nearly as often. So of course, we'd love to save you the pain of having to do it. We can just set it up for you.
Yep.
I hope that we can kind of find the time and the priority to build that and create a good experience. So not right now, but it is maybe in 10 clicks and 1 minute, you can do it yourself.
Yeah. And I think we also have like, Ujek was saying like, can I migrate Blazor to Blazor Hybrid? Like, yeah, you can. I mean, you'd still have your Blazor app, but you would put your Blazor, Razor components into a Razor class library and then share it with Blazor Hybrid. It's kind of like Alon's saying there. All right, cool. Let me add a Razor component, and I'm going to call this. It's a Razor component. I'm going to call it to-do.razor. There we go. There we go. And it's important. I am reading here that Razor component file names require capital first letter. Did you know that, Alon?
I actually don't think I knew that.
Yeah. Fun fact.
Interesting.
So this is a component, but we're going to make it a page so we can actually add it into the navigation stack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add this little at page up here. So I'm going to say at page, and then I'm going to say /to-do. That's my route basically that I'm adding on here. So I'm saying if I go to /to-do or tell it to navigate to /to-do, go to this page. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our navigation, which is inside of our nav menu. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add just another menu item in here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this menu item from fetch data. And I'm going to change this to be, instead of fetch data, I'm going to call it to do. And then I'm also going to give it the URL of to do, because that's what we named it right over here in this to-do.razor file, right? So we just named it there. If I ran it, it would just show up in the menu. That's not fun. Let's actually do the thing. So I'm going to create a to-do item over here. So I'm going to go into my data and I'm going to say add a new class. And I'm going to call this a to-do item. There we go. So just normal C# stuff. Again, this could be in a shared class, things like that. I'm going to go ahead and use modern C# stuff by deleting everything. About right. And call this public class to do item. And we're going to set two properties here. So I'm just going to copy and paste these. So this is what we want to basically create in our UI and bind in our UI. So we have a public string over here, which is a nullable annotation. So we have a title, and then we have also is done, which is going to set to false by default. So now what we're going to do is, now that we have our items, we're going to come into our to-do Razor, and we are going to go ahead and add some controls here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say at using. So that's how you bring in a namespace, and that is in our Blazor hybrid.data. No semicolon needed. Wild West over here. And we're going to create an unordered list, and we're going to give it a class. Now, this class is a just HTML or CSS styling that's built in, and John Galloway insisted that we use list unstyled because it looks better. So we're going to do that. Now, what I'm also going to do is we're going to iterate over a to-do list. So we're going to create that to-do list. I'm going to create a private list of to-do item, call it to-dos. There equals new. There we go. I like that. Nice and short, fits on the screen. And here's what's cool about this, right? Is like so far that this is, a mix of, special syntax, but I can just say at for each, and I can just kind of just use C# in here. I can say for each to do in to-dos, let's go ahead and do something with it. So let's just go ahead and output it as an item, and I can say at to-do.title, for example, and there's my property. So I'm actually binding to the item, to the title in real time, which is pretty neat. It's pretty cool. That's just Razor Blazor. Now let's go ahead and add a input here and a button underneath it. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say input. So again, this is just, web controls. You could actually create this in native controls too, if you wanted a native control. And someone was asking if you can share state, and the answer is yes, you can share state and have common, backing fields behind that. I think Alon has a good sample of that. So you can easily share the same backing data as well in state management. So you could use like an MVVM style or a controller style, share those and register those dependencies. I don't know, Alon, do you have any best practices there with sending data between native and non-native controls?
The general way, and I think actually James did some blogs recently, or probably done many blogs and videos recently, about you'd use a dependency injection and have a service. If you want, you can just have a global static field somewhere on a class, and that is one way to share state. There are problems with that, but it'll work. I would say the way you would share state is this potentially the same ways you would share state between any two native components as well. The fact that one of them is using Blazor doesn't affect that very much. There are some ways that work really well with Blazor, such as using dependency injection, having a singleton service called app state. Call it whatever you want, but app state would be a common name that has the state of your application, like the to-do items that are shared maybe throughout different parts of your application. Maybe you have a different page in your app that uses machine learning to predict your next to-do item or something like that. And that UI you happen to build using XAML and you want to share that data. Great, have an app state service. Use it here in the .razor file for the Blazor hybrid part of your application. Inject it into the XAML-based page for the XAML-based part of your application with some native UI. That works just fine. Or like I said, if you want, don't say I told you to, because I'm not telling you to do it, but you could just have a static, global static field somewhere in your application and just use it everywhere.
Sure. Yeah, like that. So cool. So what we did is I just created a little method called add to do. And on this button, I'm going to say on click, similar to how we did this before with our increment count, but I'm going to say add to do. There we go. It figures it out for us, which is nice. So whenever I click on this button, it's going to call this. So let's go ahead and fill in and give it some binding here, right? So this input, we need to know what that input is. So I'm going to come in and say private string, make it nullable, and say new to do. There we go. And now what I can do is I can use this app bind syntax. So we're binding the input to the new to do over here. So this is that just Razor binding syntax in Blazor that's enabling us to access the on click event and call this method. And then we're binding the value of the input to this new to do. So when we update this, it's going to update this. There's no property changes. There's no other thing like this. It just handles it automatically for us. That's the beauty of Blazor and this, whole setup basically. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and, update add to do to add stuff in here. So what I can do here is I can say, this is saying, if it's not null or white space, but I like to do the inverse. I would say if string is null or white space, I'm anti-arrow here, and I can say new to do. Then I can return. There we go. Else, I can come in and say to do's dot add. I'm going to add the new to do. Perfect. Cool. So now at this point, what's cool is that we can go ahead and you
have to create a to-do item, I believe.
Dang it. Okay.
Or go way off script and create an implicit conversion between strings and to-do items.
No, absolutely not.
No, it's not.
All right. So what I did is I just copied and pasted code. That's way easier. I just added a new to-do item, which has the title and the new to-do. And then I set the new to-do to string. So it's going to add it. It's going to update the UI. And then it's actually going to reset the new to-do to empty. So I can actually see what this looks like here. And again, it's binding to this to-do dot title for each item. So this should, in theory, totally work, at least from this aspect. So we now have our to-dos. Here I can say follow Alon on Twitter, add to-do, and sure enough, it's totally there. Look at that magic. If I hit to do, nothing's happening. I'll say test, and it clears it out automatically. And this is just web UI. Now we want to be able to actually mark these as to do and not to do. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, what I'm going to do is update this, and we're going to go in and we're going to change this. Instead of outputting the title, we're going to go ahead and so going to reformat it. It's not going to reformat it. There we go. There we go. We're going to add 2 inputs here. One input is going to be of, did we just find an error in this? No, I didn't. Okay, I didn't copy it correct. Okay. So one is going to be input type checkbox, and we're going to bind that to is done. And then another one to title. So we could change it later if we wanted to, and then that will update it automatically. Now, here's what's cool about this is we can also run some logic whenever we change the is done property, so we can output that. So what this is showing us here, if I just copy this and replace the H3 header, is that we can execute inside of the HTML this C# logic. So this is going to say at to-dos, which is the list, count how many to-do items are not done. That's pretty cool in general, just right inside of the Razor stuff, which is cool. So let's go ahead and run this. And again, we're doing this app bind to the value of this input checkbox, which is bound to this is done here, and same with the title. So here now I go to the to do, and I can say follow Elon. There we go. So there's that. I'll say subscribe to James on YouTube ad. I can say learn Blazor, because I actually still need to do that. I don't know what I'm doing. I just pretend like I do. Pretend like I know Blazor. Do perfect. But now I can check these checkboxes, and look at that. That's pretty neat. It updates in real time. And of course, I can change these, and I can do stuff as well, because now we have these input fields, which are nice. And now, of course, I can make this look 1,000 times prettier, right? Because I could style it with CSS, and I could use, all the fancy, fast, or I could use Tailwind, or I can use all that stuff, right? I could do whatever I want. It's a web. I can do whatever I want inside of there, which is cool. I did it. Are you proud of me, Alon?
This is amazing. Yeah, you can. But I only take issue with that last to-do item, which is pretend that you know Blazor. I don't think you're pretending, my friend.
So here's a fun question we got in the chat too from Anil. Anil was asking, can we put routing or maybe even the logic into a separate file? Yeah, I mean, totally. Like you can create a .razor.css file to put your CSS in another file behind it, or you can do to-do.razor.cs. Is that correct, Alon? And you can put your CS in the code behind.
Right. Yeah. I maybe I understood the question differently. So if you go to the very top of this file that you're in, I'm not sure if the question was about that route or maybe something else. If the question, when I saw the question in the chat, I interpreted it as what's on line 1 at the very top, at page/to-do.
Oh.
At least by default, as far as I know, that's where you specify them, which I think is perfectly reasonable. That way the page can, and you can have, by the way, multiple URLs if you want, like a to-do or to-do like a filter parameter, things like that.
Yeah.
As well. There might be a much more advanced way to register a service that sets up custom routing for the Blazor routes. I'm not sure. What I can say is if you try to, the answer to that will not be a Blazor hybrid or Maui specific answer. So if you find on Stack Overflow or on the documentation site or find on whatever application, ask your buddy who's a Blazor expert how to do that, it'll be the same Blazor answer no matter where. There's nothing hybrid specific about, or really about almost anything here that we see inside the .razor files. So there might be some way to register a custom Blazor navigation service that registers or modifies the URLs for that. I would say that would be a very uncommon thing to do. So common that like I said, I'm not even sure if that is possible, but maybe. I would certainly love to understand more about what you're perhaps trying to achieve by doing that, or you just don't like seeing it in there. That's that's fine too.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Let me go ahead and continue on because this is my favorite part, because now we're going to talk about accessing platform features in Blazor Hybrid. So if you're coming from the Blazor world, all that's going to seem pretty familiar, and it should, because it's Blazor Hybrid. The cool part, though, with Blazor Hybrid is that since it's built on top, in this case, .NET MAUI, it enables you to not only deploy to multiple platforms, but access those platform APIs. So what's nice is that .NET MAUI itself has access to those underlying capabilities and features, so you can access them in C# code. Additionally, what you can do is actually use cross-platform APIs. So here I actually outline on this doc the different sort of namespaces or features. There's application models, so things like opening a browser, opening a URI, or maps, or handling permissions, or version tracking. You can access contacts, email, SMS, web authentication, device info, battery info, sensors, flashlight, media pickers, screenshots, unit converters, storage APIs, and a lot more. So for example, if you wanted to access internet connectivity, you could do this. You could say, well, what's my current access type inside of the Microsoft MAUI networking namespace? And you could check to see if it is network access.internet. That's pretty cool. Now, under the hood, that is calling the native iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows APIs, which is very unique. So you have access to that automatically. But .NET MAUI brings about 70 or plus, features from those platforms into this space. Now, additionally, you can access platform APIs directly for iOS, Android, and Windows. So for example, here in this walkthrough, it shows you how to actually tap into device orientation if you wanted to. So here, for example, you could say, if I'm on Android, use Android-y stuff. On iOS, use iOS-y stuff. And you can access those platform-specific Android, iOS, or Windows or Mac APIs directly. So you have access to those 100%. So you could then register that as an interface and inside of a dependency service, and then button that up to your application. So if there's something you want to do, you can do that on the platform. So now what I want to do, though, is show you how we can add load and save buttons into this application and write to the file system the to-do list that we have, and specifically store it in the correct location using some platform APIs. So let's go ahead and bring that up here. So what we're going to do is we're first going to add some buttons here. So the first thing we're going to do is add these 2 buttons right here under the to-do. So here I have a save button and a load button. And that's pretty much it. And of course, it's yelling at me because save and load don't exist. So let's go ahead and add them here. I'm going to add them down over here. Now we have a new save and a load. Perfect. Now what's great here is that .NET includes system.io. So if you've used system.io for the last 20 years, it's the same system.io that you know and love. And you can use it because the runtimes for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows are optimized for those platforms. It knows how to write to those operating systems, file systems. You know what I mean? And that's what's really cool. So up top, what we're going to do is we're going to add a few namespaces. We're going to say at using Microsoft.maui.storage, and we're going to talk about what that does here in a bit. We're going to also do using system.io. And we're also going to serialize and deserialize this as a JSON blob. So we're going to bring in the built-in system.text.json, which can serialize and deserialize stuff for us, which is quite cool. So here's what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go down to the save. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit bigger over here. And I'm just going to go ahead and type through what I'm doing inside of this save to kind of really talk about it in general. So let's go ahead and do this exercise here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to take this to-do item list here. I need to serialize it. So I'm going to say var contents equals. Let me go ahead and use my fancy zoom. There we go. Perfect. And then I'm going to say JSON serializer dot serialize. I'm going to say to do. Oops, to do's. There we go. Perfect. Now I could use the asynchronous version, the synchronous version. It's kind of up to you. You can just put that in there. Now here's what interesting is, where am I going to put it? And that is a valid question. So where am I going to put it? Well, if I look at this doc, it is telling me that I'm going to use this thing called filesystem.app directory. Maybe I should have a link to a doc in it, but if I go to docs.microsoft.com/.net/MAUI, what we can see is that there's platform integrations. And inside of here, we have application model stuff, communication, device features, media, sharing, and storage. And this is where the file system helpers come in. And this is a cross-platform API that helps me access the correct locations on each operating system for the cache directory, which is a temporary storage, the app data directory, where I would want to store this data that are there and that are backed up by the operating system, or access bundled files that I add into into my application directly. So this is kind of cool. It actually walks me through this. So that's what the file system.current app data directory gives me. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to say var path, and I'm going to say path, which is coming from system.io, and we're going to combine the path where we want to store it. So file system dot, and I'm going to say app data directory, and I'm going to say to-do.json. So that's going to use just normal file path stuff there. Then I'm going to say file dot, I'm going to say write all text. And we're just going to give it the path. We're going to give it the contents, and we're good. Now, what's cool here is that I can not only access the file system here, but I can also pop up native dialog boxes too using .NET MAUI. And there's many ways of doing this, but inside of this application, I can go ahead and call and access it at an app layer. And my current app, which is the .NET MAUI app, has access to the main page. And every page in .NET MAUI has a way of displaying action sheets, prompts, or alerts. So we're going to do a display alert, and I'll say list saved. And then here I'm going to say that the list has been saved to the path, for example, here. And I'll say, okay. And this is different. This is not an alert. This is not a JavaScript alert. This is a native pop-up. So we'll see the native controls that pop up on Windows. Now, when we load it and we click that load, we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to say, well, what's our path? Let's copy and paste this path. We could probably put that in a variable, but I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to say, if the file does not exist, that's kind of cool, right? Just using system.io. Let's just return. There we go. Perfect. And then if it does, let's grab the contents. And I'm going to say file.read all text. Perfect. Say path. Bad. Then I'm going to say var saved items. I'm going to say equals JSON serializer dot deserialize. I'm going to say this is going to be a list of to-do item, right? And give it the contents. Just serializing and deserializing it. I'm going to do to-dos dot clear. So we just clear out whatever we have. And then I'll say to-dos dot add range. I'll add the saved items in there. Just go ahead and run this now. So it's actually kind of cool. Like this is just normal C# .NET stuff that maybe I've written for a long time. Ooh, I'm running the application. So let's stop the application. But I'm accessing the native file directory over here. It's mad at me. Let's try it again. Uh-oh.
I've seen this before. This might be a closed Visual Studio type of thing.
Uh-oh. Or deploy it on Android. Let me just do that. I haven't seen that before. Well, it still has preview version of Visual Studio. So there's that. There you go. But the nice thing, right, is that those platform helpers, well, it's not like oh, James, like this is revolutionary code, but this is really cool. Like you as a developer don't need to worry about where do I put it in the cache directory or in the app data directory. Like this is going to handle it all automatically for you under the hood, which I think is really awesome. So let's go ahead and get this up and running now. So it should be good. Cool. There we go. No, I don't need to auth. There we go. Cool. Okay, that did work. So finding a bug live. I like it, Alon. Let's report that. All right. So now let's go ahead and like actually add some breakpoints here. So we're going to have our app that's loading. I'm going to go to do, and I'm going to say learn Blazor hybrid. I'm going to say add to do. Let's go ahead and save it. And sure enough, my contents here, we can view it is this JSON that was added for us automatically by the serializer. Our path over here is this long path that I could have never figured out, but it's bundled into my application. Now it's going to write it, and it's going to pop up a dialog box, which is beautiful. That's exactly what you would output to your users every single time inside of the app. We can see where it's been saved specifically, and I can hit OK. And it's saved. So now if I was to say second item, add to do, and then third item, add to do, cool. I can then save it. It's saved. Let's go ahead and stop it. Let's go ahead and run it again, because that'd be way cooler than just like doing something like, you know, you got to load something. So I'm going to hit load here. There we go. Let's add some breakpoints. I'm going to go to do, hit load. And sure enough, my path is the same path. My contents that was loaded are all of my items. And now I can go ahead and add those into my list. And now I have a very, very simple way of storing state. Of course, I could put it into a database, of course, but you know, here's a good example of actually loading and saving data very easily inside of my application. And if I did something like, you know, item 4, and I hit to do, and I add these different things, I hit save, and then I was to uncheck them and hit load again, or it's going to reload the state automatically because it knows it's there. So that's pretty neat. And if I ran this on Android, we'll see if it will do it for us. Let's give it a go here. I hit load over here. I should pump up my Android emulator, which should slow my machine and rebuild the application. And we should get some Android UI that's coming up, as we can kind of see in the app here. You actually can see it automatically as you're still getting the Android app over here, and with the Android UI and the pop-ups as well, which is quite nice. So let's see how long this will take to deploy over there. Let's see. Here's a good question from Satish while this loads up. If we wanted to use JavaScript components, can we use those too? How does that work, Alon?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a JavaScript runtime. It is a browser control, so any HTML, CSS, JavaScript would run as you expect. In fact, Blazor itself has some JavaScript. It's written in TypeScript, which becomes ultimately JavaScript that runs in the JavaScript runtime. That's how Blazor boots up. And then we actually have little bits of JavaScript sprinkled in to wire everything up and communicate messages between what goes on inside that web browser component and the rest of the application that's written in .NET and C#. So if you have a JavaScript component, for example, the application you're writing has JavaScript in it. It uses Bootstrap. Bootstrap itself has JavaScript components. So if you want to use a Bootstrap dialog, I forget all the different components, but they have custom fancy drop-down lists, things like that. They work just fine. The one place where you might have a limitation is if that JavaScript code is assuming it's running in a web browser with full internet access. That is where you it can work, but you want to be cautious about what it's doing, because now you have JavaScript code that's running inside your application. If it's not your JavaScript code, you need to make sure that you trust what that code is doing, so it doesn't, let's say, exfiltrate data to some remote location or something like that. And there are ways to configure some of that. But in general, yes, if you're using Bootstrap, or you've written your own JavaScript component, or you're like me and you just put an alert, a JavaScript alert somewhere just to make sure something is running, that'll work just fine.
Nice. Very cool. And I think Akash asked in here too how to consume an external API. How would you normally consume an external API? Our good friend HTTP client. It's exactly the same. Think about it like this: is since that all this logic is running inside of your application, you just use normal C# and .NET to call those APIs. 100% the same. So I'll get this running, and then I'll show one more little sample app that we have as well. It's building up the APK, and it's doing stuff, and it's signing stuff here. So it's kind of going through the final packaging steps. I know we have like 2 minutes left, so we'll see if this thing will run. I have faith, Alon, in our day. There we go. It's loading. So now I can go to the to do, and sure enough, I can say hello. Great to do, and then other to do, hit to do, and I can check those off. I can save it. And sure enough, I get the native, pop-up that's there. Now, the other thing that we were talking about too is that, you can sort of blend these different bits and pieces together. So you went to .NETpodcast.com, for example, back over here is a ASP.NET website and a Blazor app that is built 100% in Blazor here. And I can tap on podcasts over here, which is nice. I can subscribe to them over here. I can go ahead and like start listening to a podcast, and which is cool as well. And this over here is the .NET MAUI version of the application. It's 100% native, using native controls inside of here. I can subscribe, look at my subscriptions. But what's cool is that there is this together mode, and we can see it here in the browser and over here too. So I'm just going to create a room, and I'll say Blazor. There we go. And I'm going to copy this code, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it over here and hit join room. And I'll say Android join room. And what's actually cool about this is that this 100%, just this one page, is a Blazor component in this application that enables me to share code, it enables me to share and listen to music together between the two of them, which is cool. And now I'm listening to music back and forth, and I can go ahead and enter and leave rooms in this application, which is pretty cool. So here's the native player there that we see. So it's pretty cool that I can like access that right from the application. So again, you can use as much or as little as you want in the app, and we're totally at time. So I guess with that, thanks. I don't know, Jamie, what else do we got? We could probably stick around for a few more questions if you have some.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
I'm having significant issues with my computer on this side. My apologies. But yes, so we are at time. We're probably going to get cut from the stream, but we do have lots of questions. So if y'all are able to stick around and answer some questions, I can feed those to you.
Yeah, let's do it. I think we'll get locked off from Learn TV, but we're over on the YouTube. Okay, cool, perfect.
Yeah, we're already cut from the YouTube or the live stream, but that's okay. We're catching this all in the recording, so no worries there. But yes, we do have a bunch of questions. I would love to get to these. I know that Elon was answering most of them in the chat, but I thought maybe we can address them publicly. I'm just gonna go down the list, James, in the start session, unless you think of see anything other than that.
I don't think so. No.
All right. Okay, cool. So first one that we got a bit ago was, can we use ML.NET in Blazor Hybrid? I think I know the answer to this one. Absolutely. Will there be a Blazor Hybrid template that has a Razor class library for at least one other project like Maui or WinForms?
Yeah, that's kind of what Alon touched on earlier. So like right now, no, but the templates are open source inside of github.com/.net/Maui. So there's that. So there's that.
Yeah. Do you have to install the VS Preview to use this? Yes, but can you do it with a .NET CLI?
That's a good question. I mean, technically, no, you don't have to, right? So technically, .NET MAUI and Blazor Hybrid are released GA. So you can do all this via the command line if you want, and you could edit your files inside of VS Code or something like that. And there are some documents and wiki articles on how to run and deploy those. The tooling definitely simplifies it a lot, but you can. I don't know, Alon, have you done it? It's possible.
Have I ever run it from command line? Yes. Obviously, it's generally not going to be as nice an experience as compared to having IntelliSense and Hot Reload and all those kinds of things. I think it's super important to mention that though you do need the Visual Studio Preview, you can install that side by side with whatever other Visual Studio you have. So maybe in your day job or your kind of regular life, let's say you use Visual Studio Enterprise and you have to use some particular version of it because that's what your company or your colleagues, that's what they use. That's great. You can install Visual Studio Preview side by side. So you'll have two Visual Studio icons. You'll have two Visual Studio everythings. And you'll use the preview one to do .NET MAUI and have a great experience there. And then you can use the other Visual Studio for whatever else you want to do on that. So they're side by side. So if the concern is, do I have to lose out on anything by using the VS Preview? I think the answer to that is no, you don't, because you can just have them side by side. And then when you're done with one or the other, you can uninstall or update or change which options are installed on each one. And they're independent of one another.
Okay, awesome.
Cool.
Next, will it be possible to create a Bolero hybrid app for F# devs?
No, I don't even know how to pronounce it. But
I
Bolero,
was like,
Bolero. Do you know Bolero? Bolero?
No.
I don't know. You can create .NET MAUI apps in F#, that's for sure. But that's a good question. I'm not an F# expert, so definitely follow up.
All right, so we'll follow up on this question. Could we use Shell with MAUI hybrid?
Yeah, totally. I love Shell. I'm a big proponent of Shell. So if you were doing, if you're doing just 100% Blazor, there's no need for Shell. You would never use any of the features of it, right, in general. However, if you actually take a look at the .NET Podcast application, which I'll shove a link into the comments over here, what's nice about that is it actually does use Shell. So you can actually see exactly how that works. So yes.
Okay, cool. Is it possible to run this app on iOS from the dev environment?
Totally. So there's two ways of doing that. One, head over to Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, and then you can just run it on iOS simulators or your device or on Mac over there. There's also a way to connect from Windows to a Mac OS device, and then it will pop up a remoted iOS simulator over there. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
We have a few more. Can I create an inception situation by loading a web view in MAUI to render a nested .NET MAUI app?
No. Because it's .NET MAUI renders the Blazor component in UI and web components, and Blazor doesn't render native MAUI controls. Right, so it's only one layer deep. You can't do inception.
Okay, no inception here.
Yeah, but it's Alon's over there. Who knows what he'll cook up?
And you could. There's those, I'll say, wild things out there where people have run emulators that run in the browser. So you could presumably emulate Windows inside the browser, and inside that get Windows 10 to run inside the emulator. Yeah. And the answer is no.
We're getting complicated.
I'm sure like tomorrow on Twitter, somebody's going to post like, check out what I did, and somebody will do it. So I encourage you to try, but it's not not out of the box. That's for sure. The Blazor WebView is a MAUI control. So the question could be, for example, rephrased as, can I put like a label inside a button? And the answer to that is no, you can't put a label inside a button because buttons can't contain other controls. And so the Blazor WebView is its own control. It's just like a label. It's not just like a label, but it's like a label in the sense that it's its own control. It renders its UI. So you can't put, just like you can't put a button in a label, you can't a MAUI button inside a MAUI label. You can't put a MAUI button inside a MAUI Blazor WebView.
Yep. I see. So a little clarity here. The difference between a .NET MAUI app and a .NET MAUI Blazor app is the way that you display your stuff. One with SAML or C# and the other with HTML and CSS. Is that correct? Or is there a difference?
Thumbs up.
Pretty much. Yeah.
2 thumbs up.
You did it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the .NET MAUI Blazor app is the Blazor hybrid app. Now, that being said, you can mix and match the UI. So you can do either, and you can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Now, the cool part is that you can start with the .NET MAUI application. You can always add the Blazor web component and Blazor hybrid stuff later too. And there's documentation on how to do that. The difference in the template is that it scaffolds it up for you automatically.
Okay. So So I'm reading questions, trying to get as many in
Yeah.
as possible. Okay, so this is a compliment. We always like compliments. Really exciting stuff here, by the way, coming from an Ionic Angular.NET backend to this. I could see it saving me a lot of time, allowing me to do more stuff.
That's the goal.
Great to hear it. That's the whole goal. All right, we have. Can it work with a device like biometric devices such as passport reader, facial recognition, fingerprint, iris, etc.?
Whatever the device can do, you can do it.
All righty. All right, so we're a little bit over. I know we have a few more questions in the chat. Are there ones that we want to ask the audience that are seeing here?
So Vex was asking, when can I get it? If you install the Visual Studio 2022 preview edition, that's where the .NET MAUI workload is at. So just inside of there, that's where you go. And of course, all the documentation, all that stuff there. Yes. Someone was asking if Blazor Hybrids run in offline mode. Yes, by default. There is no server. There is no WebAssembly. It's in the app. It's in the app. It's in it.
Yeah, the question, I'll rephrase the question is, can a .NET MAUI app run offline? And then I'll rephrase that question. Can an Android app or a Windows app or an iOS app run offline? It's the same answer. It's not just coincidentally the same answer for all of those. It's the same answer for the same reasons for all of those. Yeah, it's an application. If you try to make a web request and you are offline, it will fail. But as James showed, .NET MAUI has APIs to check your internet connectivity status. You could even check, am I on Wi-Fi versus mobile network? So you might want to lower your usage or turn it off completely if you're offline, or ask the user like, hey, for you're trying to do a search, you need to, if you want to refresh, you got to be online. So turn off airplane mode or pay for your airplane Wi-Fi. A few pennies or euros or whatever it costs.
Yeah,
it's offline by default in the sense that apps don't make web requests by default unless you have it make a web request.
Gotcha. I see.
cool.
Alrighty. We are a little bit over time here, but I think we got a lot of questions. Feel free to reach out to us should you have more questions on Twitter and online. We're happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our .NET Blazor Hybrid event. And we hope to see you at our .NET Focus event on MAUI in August. We also have a separate event, .NET Conf, that's regular, that's in November. 2 separate events, all the .NET we can get you in as many times as possible. So thank you again so much. Thank you, Elon. Thank you, James. You're awesome. And I hope to see you all at the next event. Take care.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Thank you, everybody.